I was still wearing my graduation cap, the tassel brushing against my cheek whenever I turned my head, when I heard the news that shattered every illusion I'd held. My father had promised me a car, a sleek, silver sedan that I'd been dreaming of for months, as a reward for graduating top of my class. It was supposed to be symbolic, a tangible sign that my family understood how hard I had worked, how many nights I'd stayed up until dawn, driven by sheer grit. But as I walked into the driveway expecting to see that shining gift waiting for me, I froze. My sister was sitting in the driver's seat of the exact car I'd been promised. She was revving the engine, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face. The sight stole the breath from my lungs. Every step I tried to take felt like wading through thick mud. I glanced at my father, hoping for some kind of explanation, maybe even a joke. But the look he gave me wasn't remorseful. It was almost smug. My eyes burned with tears, but anger surged hotter. I'd spent the past 4 years pouring my soul into achieving what they had told me was impossible. Now, in an instant, my father had snatched away the one tangible symbol of acknowledgement I had ever wanted. Growing up, I was no stranger to pushing myself beyond my limits. I wasn't naturally gifted the way my sister seemed to be at everything social, but I excelled academically. I found pride in my ability to focus, to memorize, to analyze. Weeknights were filled with textbooks piled high, weekends sacrificed to research papers and advanced study groups. I skipped school dances to finish projects, worked part-time jobs to help fund specialized tutoring, and spent summers in academic programs instead of relaxing with friends at the beach. My entire life had revolved around one goal: to stand out, to prove that I deserved my family's respect and admiration, even if no one else believed in me. That's why the car had meant more than just a set of wheels. It was validation that my father understood, on some level, the magnitude of what I had achieved. Graduating with honors and landing a spot at a prestigious university should have been cause for celebration. That car was supposed to be the ultimate nod of approval, a sign that he saw me as more than a shadow in this household. Instead, it was bestowed upon my sister, the one person who had never experienced the sting of sacrifice or the price of relentless work. My sister, Bianca, was the quintessential golden child. She had this uncanny ability to light up a room and manipulate everyone in it with her easy laughter and coquettish smiles. Teachers adored her, not for her academic achievements, but because she had a knack for charming her way out of trouble. At family gatherings, she dominated conversations with outlandish stories, most of which involved her partying until dawn or jetting off with friends on a whim. She had been suspended twice in high school for cutting class, yet our parents excused it as typical teenage rebellion. I can't even recall how many times she crashed her old car. Each time, my father footed the bill for repairs or bought her a newer model when she inevitably rendered the previous one unusable. She never held a part-time job. She never chipped in for gas or groceries or so much as folded a load of laundry at home. If questioned, she would shrug and say, it was just who she was, the free spirit of the family. That nonchalant dismissal of any sense of responsibility was maddening, especially given all the sweat and tears I poured into earning every scrap of recognition. When I finally found my voice, it came out raw and trembling, but urgent. "This was supposed to be my car," I said, my gaze flickering between my father's steady stare and my sister's smug grin. My father's lips curved into a tight line, and he let out a sigh that sounded more like a lecture about to happen. "She needs it more than you do," he said, as if that simple statement was enough to justify his actions. My eyes widened. The anger that had been coursing through me suddenly crystallized into something deeper: betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation that made sense. Didn't I deserve something for all the hard work I'd put in? Didn't I matter? But my father just stared at me with that stern, unyielding expression he saved for when he believed he was being perfectly logical. "Bianca has a lot going on right now," he continued, folding his arms over his chest as if bracing for my outburst. "You're going to college in a few months. You won't need a car on campus, and she will. Besides, you've always figured out how to manage on your own. She struggles, and I can't watch her fail." Paragraph 5. Realization of never being favored. In that moment, the final puzzle piece fell into place for me. I had spent years trying to earn my father's pride. I had strived to be the perfect daughter, studious, responsible, polite, to counterbalance my sister's wild unpredictability. And yet here I was, realizing that no matter how high I climbed, how many honors I earned, how well I behaved, I would never be the one he prioritized. My achievements paled in comparison to Bianca's mere presence in his eyes. I felt the tears threaten to spill over, but I clenched my fists and held them back. I refused to give my father or my sister the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Instead, I mustered my strength and swallowed the thick lump in my throat. "You're right," I finally said, my voice strained. "I don't need anything from you." My father's eyebrows shot up, and for a moment, I detected a flicker of regret in his eyes. But he didn't apologize. He just looked away, as if the conversation was over. Walking away from them, I felt as if the world had been inverted. The house I'd grown up in, where I'd tried so hard to shine, suddenly felt like a stage for someone else's grand performance. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling plastered with glow-in-the-dark stars that I'd placed there when I was 10. They had once given me comfort, a subtle reminder that even in the dark, I could find my own light. But now, every star felt mocking, highlighting just how trapped I was in an endless cycle of being overlooked and undervalued. My father's cold dismissal rang over and over in my ears, echoing with every breath I took. Something inside me snapped. It was as if a floodgate of suppressed emotions had burst open, reminding me of every single moment I'd been bypassed, shrugged off, or overshadowed in favor of Bianca. I realized I could stay in this house forever, hoping for scraps of approval that would never come, or I could stand up for myself in the only way that mattered, by leaving. So I packed a small duffel bag with my essentials, gathered my laptop and a few cherished books, and left a note on the kitchen table before the sun rose. It simply said, "I'm done." The moment I stepped outside, the cool morning air hit my face, mingling with the tears I had fought so hard to contain. I crashed on a friend's couch for a few weeks, working whatever odd jobs I could find. My acceptance letter to a prestigious university felt more like an escape plan than an achievement. With my father refusing to pay tuition unless I lived at home, I had to scramble for scholarships, grants, and loans. I refused to beg him for help. Every day I woke up before dawn to catch a bus or subway to my part-time gig, then spent evenings applying for financial aid or scouring the internet for free resources. Despite the exhaustion, there was a strange, exhilarating freedom in knowing I was forging my own path. No more waiting for a pat on the head or a patronizing remark. No more being overshadowed by Bianca's drama. I reminded myself of why I had worked so hard to excel academically. Self-reliance. The world had opened before me, a daunting expanse that promised uncertainty, but also a shot at true liberation. My friend's tiny living room, cluttered with her family's laundry and leftover takeout boxes, became my sanctuary. I studied there, filling out scholarship applications on my laptop, forging a future I wouldn't have to share with my father's endless favoritism. When the time came to move to campus, I felt like I was boarding a ship bound for an uncharted realm where I could shed every painful reminder of my old life. My dorm room was small and plain, but I took pride in making it my own. I taped photos of my happiest memories, those rare moments when my father's eyes lit up because of something I'd done, or times with friends who genuinely celebrated my successes. Each photo served as both a comfort and a challenge. I wanted to create new memories that would overshadow the old ones. Balancing multiple part-time jobs, I filled every spare hour with studying and networking events. I became that person who was always in the library, who asked professors for extra readings, who volunteered for mentorship programs. Friends teased me about how intense I was, but I didn't care. I was fueled by the need to prove to myself, if not to my family, that my worth wasn't contingent on some empty gesture of approval. Late at night, I would lie awake, listening to the hum of campus nightlife beyond my window. Instead of feeling left out, I felt inspired. I was building something. I was shaping a future where I wouldn't need anyone else's permission to shine. Amid all that hustle, there were nights when doubt crept in. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if my father ever missed me, or if Bianca even cared that I was gone. During these bouts of loneliness, my old scars would ache. I'd remember the countless times I'd tried to please them, cooking dinner when my mom was sick, picking up extra chores so Bianca could go hang out with her friends, or acing tests so my father could brag about me to coworkers. But every memory ended the same way, with me alone in my room, uncertain whether any of it actually mattered to them. Yet, something remarkable began to happen. The more I acknowledged these feelings of hurt and disappointment, the more I found myself growing emotionally. I started realizing that I didn't need external validation as much as I thought I did. I had proven my resilience. Every scholarship letter, every glowing recommendation from a professor, every moment of camaraderie with new friends on campus was evidence that I was capable and worthy, regardless of my father's approval. I began journaling, pouring every shred of anger, hope, and determination into those pages. The process was cathartic, helping me navigate the relentless push and pull between longing for my family's acceptance and embracing the freedom of forging my own identity. During my sophomore year, I got accepted into a competitive internship program at a tech startup that was just beginning to make waves. It was a dream come true, an opportunity to break into a world where innovation and creativity were valued. The internship paid modestly, but the experience was invaluable. I learned about product development, pitching to investors, and leadership. More importantly, I learned how to problem solve without fear, an aptitude I'd honed from years of navigating family chaos. My supervisors saw my diligence and offered me more responsibilities. I found myself leading small teams, orchestrating presentations, and even traveling to conferences. Every leap I took felt like validation that the path I'd chosen, away from my family, wasn't just a desperate flight. It was a strategic move. By the end of the internship, I had a standing job offer once I graduated. I remember reading the email in my dorm room, tears streaming down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of joy. I didn't call my father or my sister to share the news. A small part of me wanted to, if only to say, "See, I did it without you." But I remembered the sting of betrayal and decided my success would speak louder than any words ever could. By the time I graduated, I had a sturdy network of mentors, friends, and professional contacts, all of whom respected me not for my last name, but for my abilities. The day I signed the contract for my first post-college job, I did something I'd never done before. I treated myself to a fancy dinner, alone. I sat in that upscale restaurant, watching couples and families chat over expensive plates, and felt a deep sense of pride. I was the only one in my family who had ever made it this far on her own. And that realization set my heart ablaze with both triumph and sorrow. The sorrow came from knowing that my victories would never be properly celebrated at home. But the triumph was sweeter, reminding me that I didn't need them to celebrate me. I had found genuine connections in my friends who sent congratulatory texts, in my mentors who offered advice, in colleagues who invited me to toast my success. When I finally moved into my own apartment, I allowed myself a single reflective moment. I walked through the bare rooms and felt the quiet hum of possibility. This was my kingdom now, built brick by metaphorical brick from my resilience and ambition. Years passed in a blur of career milestones, late-night brainstorming sessions, and personal growth. Occasionally I'd hear tidbits about Bianca through distant relatives or old family friends. It seemed she was struggling, badly. She hopped from job to job, never lasting more than a few months. Rumor had it she was fired for being chronically late or not showing up at all. Relationships, too, came and went, leaving behind drama and financial disasters that my father tried to patch up. I felt a mix of pity and grim satisfaction at these stories. Pity because, for all her charm, Bianca had never really learned how to navigate the real world. Satisfaction because I had predicted this outcome years ago, and my father's enabling had done nothing but exacerbate her irresponsibility. While part of me was relieved to be free of the toxic environment, I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting just a bit. Even after all the pain, I still yearned for a normal sibling bond, one where we could have lifted each other up instead of watching from a distance as our lives diverged so drastically. But each update only reinforced the truth. She was the favored child who had never faced consequences. Now, reality was catching up to her. Hard, It was my mother's voice on the other end of the line one morning, trembling with a subdued desperation I'd never heard from her before. She had tracked down my unlisted number through an old friend of mine. The moment I heard her say my name, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. We had barely spoken in years. She stumbled over the usual pleasantries, asking about my job, my well-being, if I still lived in the city. Then, after the awkwardness stretched too long, she finally admitted the reason for her call. Bianca was in trouble, and my father was at his wits' end. Apparently, our parents were shouldering the weight of her mounting debts, her unpaid rent, her frequent car accidents, and her volatile relationships. The same father who had refused to fund my education unless I stayed under his roof had spent tens of thousands of dollars bailing out Bianca. And now he was on the brink of financial ruin himself. My mother's voice cracked as she confessed they were starting to regret the way they had handled things. They missed me, she said. They were sorry, she said. But most importantly, they needed my help. My father needed my help. I stared at my phone in disbelief, recalling the night I left a simple "I'm done" on the kitchen table. Now they wanted me back. It took a moment for the sheer gall of their request to sink in. They had disregarded every sacrifice I made, belittling my hard work, dismissing my tears. Yet now, when their golden child had all but destroyed them financially and emotionally, they wanted me to swoop in like some kind of savior. My chest tightened with an anger I hadn't felt in years. I wanted to hang up the phone, to shield myself from the wave of old wounds rushing to the surface. But something kept me listening. Perhaps it was the hesitant catch in my mother's voice as she insisted how proud they both were of what I'd accomplished. Or maybe it was the echoes of a younger version of me, yearning for their acknowledgement. They needed me to talk to Bianca, to mentor her, to guide her out of the mess she'd created. My mind reeled, remembering how many times she'd scorned my advice, how many times my father had brushed aside my perspective with a patronizing pat on the shoulder. I considered how to respond, my silence stretching for a long moment. Finally, I told my mother that I'd think about it. When I hung up, my heart pounded against my rib cage like it was trying to escape my body. I spent the next few days in a state of emotional turmoil, torn between my lingering resentment and a bizarre pang of loyalty. After all, these were my parents, the people who had raised me, albeit imperfectly. And Bianca, for all her flaws, was still my sister. A part of me felt responsible, as if by walking away all those years ago, I'd left her to fester in her bad habits, without any voice of reason to counter our father's unyielding coddling. Yet I couldn't ignore the raw injustice of the situation. They hadn't wanted my guidance before, when I was too serious or too uptight. They only wanted it now, when their beloved daughter's life was spiraling. I tried to imagine what stepping back into that toxic orbit would feel like. Would they truly listen to my advice, or would they revert to their old patterns the moment it became inconvenient? I revisited my journal, flipping through years of entries in which I had poured out my heartbreak and anger. The pain felt fresh again. This wasn't just about helping someone in need, it was about re-entering a role I'd fought so hard to escape. I had built a life of independence, free from their manipulations and favoritism. Did I really want to jeopardize that now? Eventually, my mother called again, her voice more urgent this time. In the background, I could hear my father's muffled voice, instructing her on what to say. So I did what I should have done the first time. I set the terms. I agreed to meet them in a neutral place, a local cafe near my city, far from the suffocating walls of our old home. When they arrived, they both looked older, worn down. My father's once imposing posture seemed to droop, and my mother's eyes were rimmed with dark circles. They tried to smile, but it was strained. They dove into a litany of Bianca's woes: unpaid bills, toxic relationships, and near-constant unemployment. "She listens to you," my mother said, desperation coating every syllable. "You can reach her in a way we can't." I raised a hand to stop them. "Let's be clear," I said, my voice betraying none of the rage pounding inside me. "I'm not swooping in to fix your mistakes. I have a life, a career, and obligations of my own." I watched my father's face tighten, clearly unaccustomed to being spoken to with such firm detachment. But I didn't flinch. I was done cowering. My father, who had once been so self-assured, looked like a man grappling with a bitter reality he didn't know how to face. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. My mother pressed her hands together as if in prayer, tears shining in her eyes. She murmured something about how they were sorry, how they hadn't realized the toll their favoritism had taken on me. It was surreal, hearing these admissions. I dreamed of a moment like this when I was younger, but now it felt hollow and far too late. I could see their guilt, and for a fleeting moment, I pitied them. They had pinned all their hopes on Bianca, never envisioning the day when she'd require more parental guidance than they could muster. Meanwhile, they had cast me aside, confident that I would always be self-sufficient. Now, they were the ones left feeling powerless, begging for the very daughter they'd alienated to intervene. I drew a long breath, trying to remain calm. Despite the anger, a small voice in my head reminded me that I was no longer the desperate teenager craving their validation. I had my own power now, my own agency. Their guilt didn't have to become my responsibility. Sitting there in the cafe, I felt a flashback to the night I'd packed my duffel bag and left the "I'm done" note. I remembered the cold morning air stinging my cheeks, the way my heart pounded as I stepped outside, unsure of where I would sleep the next night, or how I would manage without any support. Every ounce of self-determination I had shown then was now paying dividends. I thought about how I had arrived at this point, financially independent, with a promising career, and enough self-worth to look my parents in the eye without flinching. It struck me as both ironic and poetic justice that they'd come to me for help. Would I have been in a position to help them if I'd stayed under their roof, continuously overshadowed by Bianca's demands and whims? Probably not. The memory of packing up my life in the darkness reminded me of how terrifying and exhilarating it was to take that leap. Today, I felt the same surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Only this time, I wasn't running away. I was standing firm. In that sense, the journey from that fragile, frightened girl to the composed woman I was now felt complete. As I looked at my parents, I saw the tangible weight of regret pulling at them. Their faces were etched with a realization that maybe, just maybe, they had paved the way for Bianca's downfall by never letting her face consequences. Part of me wanted to scold them, to deliver a long overdue, "I told you so." But I also recognized that such scolding would do nothing to mend the past or help the present. After a tense silence, I reached for my coffee cup, my hands steady. "I'm willing to hear you out," I said. "Tell me what you expect from me, and I'll decide if I can do it. But let's be clear, I'm not going to be a savior." My father cleared his throat, as if testing his voice. It was the first time he'd spoken in the entire conversation. "We just need you to talk to her, help her find a job. Maybe teach her some responsibility. She looks up to you, even if she won't admit it." The irony was painful. My father was acknowledging that Bianca actually looked up to me. But it was too little, too late. I nodded, telling them I'd think about it, and then stood up to leave, my footsteps resolute on the tiled floor. A few days later, Bianca showed up in my city unannounced. She looked nothing like the carefree sibling I remembered. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes ringed with exhaustion, and she carried a single tattered bag that looked like it had been stuffed in haste. Standing in my apartment doorway, she asked if she could come in, her voice startlingly humble. I motioned for her to sit, and she sank into my couch, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for a storm. She avoided my eyes, fiddling with the frayed edge of her jacket. Then, in a halting voice, she confessed how everything had fallen apart. She'd lost her job again, her boyfriend had kicked her out, and our parents were threatening to cut her off if she didn't get her act together. She spoke in a quiet monotone, lacking the usual bravado that always tinged her words. This was the first time Bianca had ever come to me for help of her own accord. Gone was the cocky smirk that once made me feel inferior. Now, she was the one who seemed small. A twisted feeling of both pity and vindication tightened in my chest. This wasn't the triumphant sister who had once reveled in taking what was mine. This was a broken person, painfully aware that the world no longer bent to her whims. I offered her a glass of water, and she sipped it nervously. For a while, we sat in silence, the weight of our shared history crowding the air. Finally, she mumbled something about how she never meant to take the car from me, that Dad had just offered it, and she didn't think I'd mind since I was going to college. The apology was half-hearted, laced with that old entitlement, but I could see it was the closest to remorse she'd ever get. That car was a symbol, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice from trembling. You probably never realized it, but it represented everything I'd worked for. My father's respect, his belief in me. When you took it, you took more than just a car. She looked up, her eyes misty. I'm sorry, she said more earnestly this time. I guess I never thought about it that way. Hearing that word, sorry, did something unexpected. It pricked at the numbness I'd cultivated over the years, but I also felt a surge of frustration. An apology now, after all this time, felt inadequate. She was only saying it because life had finally taught her the hard lessons our parents never did. And part of me couldn't help resenting that I'd had to learn them on my own, without any mercy. A day later, my parents called again, this time on speakerphone. They asked for an update, wanting to know if Bianca had come to see me. When I confirmed that she had, I could almost hear their relief through the phone. My mother quickly launched into a spiel about how grateful they were, how they knew if anyone could help Bianca turn her life around, it would be me. My father chimed in, his voice measured. This is your chance to mend fences, to be the family we should have been all along, he said. I know we haven't always made the right choices, but this is bigger than all of us. There it was, the guilt trip, neatly packaged. The insinuation that if I chose not to step in, I'd be the one holding back our family's healing. My heart clenched at the manipulation, but I refused to let it break me. I told them calmly that I would support Bianca if she was truly serious about changing, but I wouldn't coddle her. I wouldn't pay her bills or bail her out of new messes. She needed to learn self-reliance, just as I had. I could practically hear my father bristle on the other end, but he said nothing. Over the following weeks, Bianca tried to follow my advice. She applied to jobs, took online courses to upgrade her skills, and even asked me to help her create a budget. At first, it felt strangely gratifying to see her listening, actually listening, to my guidance. Each day she didn't skip out on an interview or blow money on frivolities, felt like a minor victory. But old habits die hard. One evening, she returned to my apartment in tears, having been turned down for a job she wanted. She lashed out, claiming it was unfair, that she was being judged for her past. I looked her straight in the eye and told her, life is unfair, but it doesn't owe you anything. You have to keep going. The words echoed with a steely conviction that had been missing in my younger self. Bianca's eyes brimmed with tears, but I didn't offer pity. I'd lived through countless disappointments, and none of them had been softened by my parents or anyone else. If she wanted the life of independence she claimed, she had to walk the hard road like the rest of us. My resolve shocked her, and I suppose it shocked me too. I'd never been so unwavering in my life, especially not with her. At that point, my parents started demanding more from me. They wanted me to let Bianca stay in my apartment indefinitely, insisting it was only until she could get her feet on solid ground. They asked if I could loan her some money just to help with rent, as if I were some bottomless well of resources. The audacity stunned me, but I realized they still hadn't changed. They were looking for another crutch to enable Bianca's behavior, this time in the form of me. So one evening, I invited them over. Bianca was out on a job hunt, and I had the apartment to myself. As they sat on my sofa, I calmly explained that while I was to teach Bianca the skills she'd neglected, I would not carry her burden. If you keep bailing her out, she'll never learn, I said, my voice firm. My father tried to protest, claiming he was just being a good parent. Were you a good parent when you gave her that car I was promised, when you let her float through life while ignoring me? I asked, my gaze never wavering from his. Silence blanketed the room. I could see in their eyes a complicated mix of shame and stubbornness. It was the moment I'd been waiting for, the chance to speak my truth without fear. Rising to my feet, I took one last look at them. At the people who had shaped my life both positively and negatively. My voice was steady, crystal clear as I said, I've built myself up from nothing. No car, no financial safety net, no endless second chances. And I'm proud of that. I will not be roped into cleaning up your mistakes. I won't stunt my own progress because of the chaos you've enabled." My mother's eyes welled with tears, and my father's shoulders sagged as though someone had just dropped an impossible weight onto them. But I felt no pity, only a sense of finality. I'd given them my conditions, and either they'd respect them or they wouldn't. No further debate was necessary. The last thing I said before leading them to the door was, "I'm here to help Bianca help herself, but I won't pour my hard-earned life into bailing her out. If you can't accept that, then this is where our story ends." Then I opened the door and waited. They left without another word. As the door clicked shut, I felt a surge of exhilarating freedom course through my veins, this time without the weight of heartbreak or insecurity. In that final mic drop moment, I understood that true success isn't just about rising above your circumstances. It's about knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and never apologizing for the strength you fought so hard to gain.